Tribune Jelian Marlaxia sat at the bar, lost in his thoughts and practically unaware of his surroundings, or as unaware as a combat veteran can get. He held a small hollow medallion in one big fist. His drink was still practically full, which was unheard of happening to his first drink. He wasn't even consciously aware of the eyes of all the patrons, trying to discreetly glance at him, hoping for one of his stories or his collection of bad human jokes. Dad jokes, he called them. But Karau and Tequin took advantage of their positions as fellow instructors and approached the Tribune. "Jal, are you all right? You don't seem like yourself," Kiral asked. Tribune Marlaxia came back from that faraway place his thoughts had taken him. The two instructors sat down on either side of him and ordered their drinks. Tequin pointed at the small device in his hand. "What do you have there?" Tequin asked. Jelian opened his hand and replied, "Something a friend gave me a few years ago." "A hollow medallion? What's on it?" Kiral asked. Jelian pushed the button to activate it. An image of himself standing between two humans, his forearms on their heads and all three smiling. It changed to another one, and this time the two humans were standing on boxes and all three were laughing. The last saw all three in front of a drop shuttle. The two humans were dressed as pilots and Jelian was in his battle gear. You could faintly see other humans boarding the shuttle in the background. "Who are they?" Kiral asked. "The one on the left is Flight Lieutenant Marcus Corvine and Flying Officer Desta Dejin Dawit, aka Trip of the Terran Navy," Jelian said. "They were the pilots of the shuttle that pulled myself and my remaining soldiers off that down ledge on Raza 6, Jelian continued. "I became close friends with them after I volunteered to be part of an exchange of Coalition and Terran officers to learn how each other do things," Jelian said before continuing, "and begin to strengthen the bonds started on Raza 6. Jelian paused before continuing. "I also learned they weren't combat pilots, but what the humans call search and rescue. Of course, they can and do fly combat missions, but their main job was S&R, as they sometimes called it. I learned their actions on Raza 6 was just one of their functions." Jelian looked around the room, noticing for the first time how quiet it was, the entire bar trying to catch his words. He shrugged and turned in his seat, facing the rest of the room. Easier to just tell them than have them trying to eavesdrop. Jelian spoke a little louder. "They also search the wreckage for survivors of space battles, evacuate wounded, assist with accidents, or even help civilians look for people missing in the wild. And I also learned just how high the casualty rate is among their crews," Jelian said. Kiral asked, "Why is that?" Jelian looked around. "Just because they aren't combat pilots, don't underestimate their bravery," he continued. "They perform their duties in the middle of battle. Marcus told me S&R units had a motto that had been used for centuries." Jelian paused before finishing. "Hec facimus autali vivant." "It turns out I didn't understand the meaning like I thought I did." One of the cadets raised his hand. "What does that motto mean?" it asked. "I'll get to that later on," Jelian replied. About 12 cycles ago, or a little over 3 of their years, there was an emergency beacon from a small colony in the Patoris sector, Faranth 2. There wasn't much there. It was mostly just to mine bostrium crystals. Their local star started emitting 3 times the normal amount of cosmic radiation, and it was only a matter of time before it overwhelmed the colony's radiation shielding and killed everyone on the planet. The humans responded to that call with one of their long-range explorer ships, Jelian continued. Their active radiation shielding let them survive much higher doses of cosmic radiation than most other ships. Jelian continued. It also had enough room to carry the entire population of the colony in one trip. They added 15 more dropships to the ship's normal complement of 5. Of course, my friends volunteered to go. Jelian paused, noticing that every head was turned his way. I learned all of the pilots were volunteers. 20 ships meant 40 pilots. I have trouble imagining many other races getting that many volunteers for such a dangerous mission. One of the cadets raised his tentacle. Yes, Wesso. Jalian acknowledged the cadet. Why was it so dangerous? They weren't flying combat, just picking up colonists, Wesso asked. Jalian paused to gather his thoughts. While the explorer ship was well shielded, the dropships were not. Jalian continued. They had to add more passive radiation shielding in the cargo hold to protect the colonists on the way up. But this severely reduced the number of passengers it could carry to around 100 people, and the shielding could enclose the dropship's cockpit, Jalian said. This meant getting the roughly 50,000 colonists off the planet meant each shuttle had to make around 25 down and back runs, with each taking about 45 minutes in human time, or 7.5 sectars, in our system. It also meant the rapidly increasing levels of cosmic radiation exposure would begin to exceed what the cockpit and pilot's armor could keep out. Jalian looked around. Despite this, they had more than enough volunteers to crew the ship, fly the jump ships, work the hangars, and handle the colonists. I met up with them at their Acronia space station a few days after their mission was finished. Both of them were looking slightly pale, even for humans. They brushed it off as just being tired from the last mission and all the craziness getting back here, Jalian said, a look of sadness on his face. We talked about the mission and they told me how crazy it was, making multiple planetfalls at the maximum speed that could be safe for planetary entry. As Marcus called it, an express elevator to hell. 2 dropships were lost when they made entry at the wrong angle. Just a degree or 2 off was enough to tear them apart. Jalian paused before continuing. This happened late in the evacuation, so it's thought fatigue caused them to crash. My friends ended up picking up 3 more trips, down and back. 3 more times to absorb radiation that had risen above the level of shielding for the dropships. But they got it done with minimal losses. 50,000 colonists evacuated at the cost of 14 pilots and crew lost to accidents, Jalian said. The ship's decontamination facility was overwhelmed, so they're still processing colonists, and the dropships were so radioactive that they had to be ejected and autopiloted toward the planet to destroy them. Jalian took a pull at his drink before setting it down and continuing. It was a mere matter of months before the dropship crews began getting sick. The amount of radiation absorbed had begun to cause mutations in their DNA and caused a new form of cancer that was resistant to all their usual methods of treatments. One by one, they began to die off. Jalian paused to look at the holomedallion. My friend, Flying Officer Dawi, passed 2 years ago. My other friend, Flight Lieutenant Corvine, was the last surviving pilot when I stopped into the medical center to visit him a dozen rotations ago, Jalian said. After the usual chatting between old friends, I asked if he would have still volunteered that day, if he knew this would happen. He gave me this weird look and pointed to a sign hung on the wall. It was covered in signatures from other SNR crews, and the middle contained the SNR name and insignia. Below those were the words, Hec facimus, Autali vivant. It was from an old Terran language he called Latin. These things we do, that others may live. When I first heard it, I thought it was just words. I was very wrong. Jalian looked at the image again with a sad smile. Marcus told me, we all knew it was a death sentence from the start. That is why we only used 20 volunteers for that part of the mission. They could have rotated more pilots in, but that would have just increased the number of casualties in the long run. And then, he told me, he had no regrets about turning their motto into actions. Jalian paused, looking like he had to force the next words out. He died last rotation. His commanding officer informed me of it earlier in the day. He also wanted to tell me there would be a memorial service for him and the rest of the pilots, and he hoped I'd attend. Corral looked at Jalian. Go. I'll cover your classes, Tequin spoke up. "And I will as well." "Thank you, my friends," Jalian said, before reaching for his drink. He raised his glass. "A toast to my friends and the other pilots." All around the bar, glasses were raised. "That others may live," Jalian spoke before draining his glass. Everyone in the bar repeated the phrase and took a drink. "That others may live."